Nā kere whakamoimiti ki te atua, mō nā manakitanga me nā awhi ki a mātou. Nā rangatira tēnā koutou mihi awa ki a koutou, nā reira tēnā koutou, ki ora koutou katoa. Greetings to everybody. This is a really long and detailed report, and there's no one in the group that could answer all the questions you might have about every part of it. You know, like there's health specialists and there's employment specialists and so on. But I'm going to try and give you an overview so that you do actually see the breadth of it. And we can deal with whatever questions. I should be able to deal with most of them, but there may be some difficulties with. So let's get started. So the government chose 11 independent people they called experts to overhaul the welfare system. And I'll introduce you to those people shortly. They set up a terms of reference. So this was the agreement with the Greens. The Greens confidence and supply agreement had a central plank, which was an overhaul of the welfare system. And as Glenn has said, we all know it's broke. But to the extent it is broken, it really needs to be studied. We need good evidence on it, and it's pretty surprising how bad it is. The report is called Whakamana Tangata. So this is really trying to look at dignity, the mana of people, and to look at welfare recipients in a completely different way to the way they've been treated by the work and income system as a whole. There's a whole lot of technical reports, and all of these are on WEAG. I'll give you the website at the end, but if you just Google in WEAG, which is Welfare Expert Advisory Group, WEAG, you'll find all the background reports are there. There are many recommendations. They talk about 42, but they're just the summary recommendations. There's a lot of detail, and I'll share some of those details, but obviously not all. The interesting thing is we reached a consensus, and this is the group that did it. So I'm introducing you to these people because I think it's helpful to know the breadth of the group that came. So this is Robert Reed from First Union. This is Professor. I've just forgotten. Yeah, someone knows it. Innes. This is Innes Asher, who's Professor of Paediatrics at Auckland University. This is Latavia, who was the young person on the group. She's a Samoan woman. Kay Brereton, who's a benefit advocate and works with benefit advocacy organisations, and so brings that whole element to it. This is Professor Sydney Kiro, who was the chair of the group and led it extremely well. She's Pro Vice Chancellor Māori at Auckland University. This is Dr. Huhana Hiki, obviously quite an outspoken person on disability. She has a PhD in law and lives on a benefit herself. So this is Trevor McGlinchey from the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services. Ganesh Rana from Burl, of course, and he was the deputy chair of the group. This is Professor Tracy McIntosh, Professor of Indigenous Studies at Auckland University. Phil O'Reilly from Business New Zealand. And then we had Michael Fletcher, who wasn't a member of the WEAG group, was the special advisor to it. And there's me. So that's the group. So it's quite a broad-based sort of skilled group. So the current social security system is not working for a whole lot of good reasons. When I say good reasons, for a whole lot of reasons. It's 80 years old. It was designed, in the Michael Joseph Savage days. In those days, it was a very different society to what we have now. So there was primarily one male breadwinner in most households, and there was just a totally different economic circumstances. There was none of the fluidity of relationships and family structures and income earning power that we have today. And when we come to look at income adequacy, the amount that's paid, there's no logic to it. You know, it's like there's a certain amount that's paid in benefit. It's got nothing to do with how much food costs, housing costs, energy costs. It's an amount that was set back then and it's been fiddled with, added to, reduced, depending on political whims or economic circumstances over the period of time. So it's well due for an overhaul. The agreement is near universal that the benefit system and the tax credit system is unmanageable and complex. It's quite broke. And you need to think of that there are 630,000 beneficiaries. These are not superannuitants, these are the other beneficiaries. 630,000 beneficiaries currently depend on that system for income. The level of income support, financial support, is so low that New Zealanders are desperate. Not only do we have the evidence of that, I mean, we've been doing this and many other groups have through the New Zealand Poverty Measurement Project, but not only through that, we went around the country and heard people talk, the stories just break your heart. I mean, you come away absolutely wrung out listening to these stories. Story after story after story of people trying to feed their kids, trying to deal with work and income, trying to deal with landlords and all the difficulties that are there. So it's a need of urgent and fundamental change. And we know, depending on which measure, but one of the central measures for child poverty is about 215,000 children are below what the Ministry of Social Development consider a reasonable threshold. So our recommendations from the beginning were to seek and embed a new basis for social security that would restore trust in the system and enable whakamana tangata, the dignity, respect for people who receive income from the benefit system. So the current system is based on conditionality, so there's sanctions, it's tightly targeted. We heard terrible stories. For example, in one place I was in, a mother, her father had died, and she just dropped everything and went to the tangi with her children. And the tangi went on for a week, and she stayed another week with her family, and work and income stopped her benefit because she hadn't informed them before she left. Well, she wasn't even thinking about that sort of thing and never expected that, didn't understand. And it's not that work and income workers are sort of mean people, because we met some very fine ones. It's that they're in a system where they're encouraged to be tight, to be very strict with the rules. Often the human things were not taken into account. Their experience of using the system was damaging and unsatisfactory. And these are some of the most vulnerable people in New Zealand that we should be respecting, perhaps even more than others. We heard overwhelmingly during the consultation that the system diminishes trust, causes anger, resentment, and contributes toxic levels of stress. And there's a lot of research background to back that up. And just as a matter of interest, there's now been a lot of work done internationally around the impact of sanctions and welfare, and they don't actually increase compliance anyway. It's not, the evidence base shows that just treating people and being more and more tough doesn't actually lead to greater compliance. If people are having difficulties, it becomes, as far as we're concerned, the responsibility of the ministry to find ways, smart ways to help people and support them and build trust again in that system. So we propose a system based, as I've said, on whakamana tangata, an approach based on mutual expectations. And I think what we're interested in is that since the neoliberal experiment, from sort of mid-1980s onwards, basically government departments, and if we think in this case in the beneficiary system of MSD and work and income, basically the obligations are all one way. And the accountability is all one way. It's like the beneficiary to the ministry. Well, we think it should be both. There should be accountability of the ministry to the beneficiaries. That their task, as a result of using taxpayers' money, is to enhance the well-being of people, whatever the circumstances are, whether it's a health circumstance, an unemployment circumstance, or whatever it is. The taxpayer pays money so that these people can be supported in as much as they need it and help back into work if that's what they're able to do, or if they're not able to do that, to be supported on an ongoing basis. And in fact, any one of us could fall into that system, and numbers of us, I'm sure, here have already had that. So we're trying to reverse some of these things, not take them to another extreme, but get the obligations going both ways. So it needs an immediate reform of obligations and the sanctions regime. And if we adopt this approach, we're quite sure it will make a huge difference to key sort of victims of the system at the moment, Māori, Pacific people, people with health conditions and disabilities. I mean, some of the disability stories you hear are just unbelievable. And the ongoing reporting they have to do that their disability is continuing. Even people who've got conditions which go on forever anyway. You know, still having to fill out forms every 3 months and sort of quite unnecessary things like that. So, let's get into some of the action on the whole thing, what we actually did. So, let's look at benefit income. And I'll just show you how it was calculated, because it's a very big figure. It's 5.2 billion. When we look at the whole system, and I'll go through how we did the calculations. When we go through the whole system, it is so broke and so underfunded that in order to get a minimum adequate amount for all the people that are on benefits would require an injection of 5.2 billion per annum. 5.2 billion per annum. So that's one of the high-level findings of the system. I'll tell you how we got there in a second. And obviously that can't happen in one budget. That's got to be a phased in the way it happens. So this is, I'll tell you how we get there. So first of all, the evidence is overwhelming that incomes are inadequate. We know through the poverty research and so on, the fact that we have to have living wage movement just to get wages up too, because it's not just benefits, of course. There are many low income workers that are receiving help from the welfare system, like accommodation supplement. Some are on part work, part benefit, and so on. So the groups particularly affected, of course, are Māori, Pacific people, health conditions, people with disabilities, and young people. And we know now that living in poverty results in long-lasting poor outcomes for benefit recipients, their children, their families and whānau and society. If we marginalise 20 to 25% of the population over long periods of time, then we're losing all that possibility of innovation, all that creativity, all that sort of employment possibility, and instead have many health payments, many justice payments, you know, because of imprisonment we create stress and unhappiness, and it's exactly the opposite to what you want to be doing in a sort of modern society. So, the evidence is strong that the negative effects of poverty have a wide range impact on children, including cognitive development. There's just so much research on this. School attainment, health, social, emotional and behavioural development. So we're paying zillions into the system and we're not getting the outcomes that we want. So we've got to have a system that's fit for purpose. So that when we put money into it, it actually achieves what we want, because we want good things for the children of the country. And of course there's now more and more research around mental health and those impacts. So we want the benefits increased, and we want to reduce the barriers to accessing the system, the stand-down periods, all the performance you've got to go through to get on the benefit in the first place. One of the things that that Ganesh has been quite strong on, and Phil O'Reilly agreed, was that basically we've had quite a lot of prosperity in New Zealand over 3 decades. And that has been captured largely by the middle and upper income groups. And we've actually taken away what should have been shared from the prosperity of the country with that lower group. We've actually taken from them. And it's really gone too far now, and it's time to pay back. So this is a large amount of money because it has been neglected for so long. And I think that's worth thinking about. If you think of what happened in 1981 under that Bruce Richardson budget, and if you just think much more recently of the global financial crisis, you know, when it came right, the rest of us started going up and up. Incomes and stuff, wages have gone up, but the benefits haven't, hardly at all. There's been odd little tinkers, but very little. Okay, so I want to show you how we construct the amount. How's this school cost? Okay. So we had to work out, and we had a secretariat from the Ministry of Social Development. We had to work out what was an appropriate amount you pay for different family types, you know. So you've got your single parent with 1 child, you've got 2 parents with 2 children, you've got single men, single youth, and, you know, all the different types. So we had to work it out. So we had to construct budgets. Now, today we have much more empirical information about what people need. So a lot of that's come through the research that I've been involved in, actually, through the New Zealand Poverty Measurement Project with Bob Stevens and originally Paul Frater, but also through all the work that we've done with Peter King in setting the living wage. We've had to find out where are the databases that actually could bring some logic to the benefit. As I've said, it's just a set amount of money. It's got absolutely nothing to do with what people need. It's not costed ever in all of your lifetime and my lifetime. It hasn't been costed on the basis of what you need for food, what you need for housing, you know, the way you'd think that you would provide adequate income. So there's a number of independent databases. So, for example, for food, the nutrition department of Otago University have a food cost survey. And each year they estimate how much children of different ages require, and they have minimal budgets and they have higher budgets than that. So we took the minimal budget, which has the minimal amount of protein that children of different ages and in different parts of the country require. So that was the evidence base for that. For housing, we have the rent bond database that MD holds, which gives us the rents in every area of New Zealand, the current rents for households of different size, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, whatever. So we took the 25th percentile. So that's, if you take the bottom rent and the top rent, 25 up, so halfway below the average, or halfway below the median, is the 25th percentile. We took that as the objective cost there. We now have, and it's much more recent research, as a result of the work that Philip Houghton Chapman have done and brands, how much energy you need in a house to keep it warm enough for children of different ages, and how the different amounts you need in different regions. So you need more heating in Dunedin than you need in Auckland, for example, because of the differences in the climate. So we're able to draw on that. We now have quite good data on medical costs, what families are paying in medical costs for families of different sizes and different ages. And that includes dental costs, and we also have quite good surveys these days of costs that parents pay for schooling and education. For the rest, we have the Household Economic Survey database, which tells us what people are spending, and we can look at the bottom. It's a bit hard to get the 25th percentile on the Household Economic Survey database because the figures become a bit dodgy. So what we tend to do, and we learned this in the living wage research, that we get the bottom half, bottom 50%, and then divide it by 2 and work out what is likely to be the 25th percentile at that point. So we developed the budgets from that. So coming from that basis, it then had to be modelled. Now, all the modelling that we wanted from Treasury couldn't get because it didn't have enough time, or we weren't the priority, there were some other things they were doing or whatever, but we got quite a bit of modelling. And when that is all modelled for all the different families, comes to 5.2 billion. But it came out of that base. So I just want you to understand that there's an empirical base to all of that, and you can go back to it. There's a background paper on family budgets, and you can see it. It's going to need further refining by MSD and Treasury to get it more precise, but it's going to be in that sort of range. So what it means is, depending which benefit you're on, they need an increase of between 12 and 47%. So some are really, really underpaying badly. And the other thing is the abatement rates. The abatement rates are terrible. You know, if you're... We had a sole parent came in the other day, and if she works 20 hours, when the abatement comes in, that's when the benefit starts being cut as a result of the income you're earning, she's actually worse off working for 20 hours than she is on a benefit. So she asked the employer, this is a true story, she asked the employer not if she could be if she could do it voluntarily, because she really wanted to do that work. So she could stay on the benefit, and she got a few more dollars a week. That's just a ridiculous abatement system. It's not fit for purpose, and sometimes it doesn't work badly, and other times it just cuts your income off altogether. So just to give you an indication of this sort of thing, for job seeker support, we're basically saying people need to be able to earn the first $150 a week before any abatement starts. So that makes sure that you're ahead as a result of going to work. Sole parent and supported living payments, as you can see, you should be able to earn 150 or 250. The other thing is indexing. These benefits have never been indexed. Now, you know, if you're in the labour market, you're in a job each year or every 2 or 3 years, there's normally some lift, some adjustment in income. I mean, what you were earning 3 years ago would be different if you're doing the same job, would be different to what you're earning now. You get more. These benefits have been indexed to the CPI and to the Consumer Price Index, and for the people at the bottom it hardly moves. And they need to be indexed to wages. Superannuation is indexed to wages or the CPI, whichever is the greatest. And that's what we're suggesting, that's what we put forward for benefits. They should move in line with other New Zealanders' income to keep a parity. And the accommodation supplement, which has got heaps of problems, I'll get onto that a bit later, but the accommodation supplement needs to move with housing costs. It needs to be indexed to housing, obviously, because that's what it's paying for. And family tax credits, of course, in relation to wages and so on. And that's the way we've indexed the living wage, of course. So here's a few things, I'll just rush through them quickly. Allow a 6-month period rather than 6 weeks when people move in together. So we have this really difficult situation whereby you get more if you're on a DPB than if you're just if you're a single person. So a person on a DPB moves in with a single person, and then after 6 weeks they've got to declare that if they've moved in together. Well, what this does is destabilises relationships, because people need often longer than that to decide, because the issue affects children hugely, and you get neighbours topping people off, and when's people coming in and checking who's been sleeping for how many. It's really gross, the whole thing. So what we're basically saying is people need time to develop these relationships. It's in the interest of the children. So let's move this period from 6 weeks to 6 months. It's this sort of logic that we're trying to use. Do not deem two people who do not live together as being in a relationship for the purposes of welfare support. I mean, many of these relationships today are much more fluid than they used to be. And it's not up to the welfare system to do moral judgments on all of this. This is the way people are living. This is the way New Zealanders choose to live. It's within the law, and the impact on children is what we're interested in. And that's what we need to be protecting people. So we want to see a much more neutral respect for relationship status and increased individualisation of benefit entitlement. So when people separate, it's not complicated. You're having a huge fight about that. And for the benefit to follow a child much more reasonably. So instead of one person getting all the benefit, winner takes all. If a child's 1 week with one parent, 1 week with another, the benefit should go. The child, the benefit follows the child, not the parent. Whoever is looking after the child in whatever proportion, that's the way we want to see it worked out. So a couple of others. Consider introducing a living alone payment. Now that includes living alone. This is talking about adults living alone. So that includes sole parents. So that if you have more individualised benefits, so two people living together just get a benefit times two. If you're a sole parent, you do have extra costs. And these are vulnerable people, so it's important that there's some extra payment that acknowledges that. Remove the initial stand-down period. There's no logic for it, apart from the government saving itself some money. And when child support comes, pass it straight through. A lot more men, I'm sure, would give child support if they didn't think it was going to be swallowed up by the government. So here's a couple of principles with regard to the principles that we use with regard to income, and I'll move off income into housing. So I'll just read these out. So these are the 10 principles we want to see in the redesign of the income support system. So income support is adequate for meaningful participation in the community, and the support is maintained over time. So I think I've given you examples of that. Income support ensures people are always better off in paid work, and high effective marginal tax rates are avoided as much as possible. Main benefits cover a large proportion of people's living costs, and they do not than they do currently, reducing reliance on other assistance. Child-related payments follow the child and can be apportioned with shared care. Payments for specific costs provide support that is adequate, appropriate, and designed and easy to access. Changes to income support reduce disincentives to form relationships. So where they create disincentives, we want to have them removed. The income support system proactively supports people to access their full and correct entitlement. So this business of treating people with dignity is also about ensuring that people are told all that they are entitled to. I mean, the law entitles them to a whole lot of things. And there's been huge savings by income workers. Often they were instructed to do this, so it's not always their fault, to save money, not to inform people. So we want to see a requirement that people are treated with dignity and respect, and that when workers are accountable to these people, and they're accountable to ensure they're told their full entitlement. The income system needs to be easy to access, and you can see the rest. People treated with dignity, respect, and so on. Okay, housing. Now, I led this work group, so I'm very familiar with this stuff. Here's a few things you might not be aware of. The average cost of rent for low-income households in New Zealand is 45% of household income for those on the bottom 20%. So it includes all beneficiaries, which means many people are paying more than 50% of very meagre incomes on rent. House price inflation has been double that of incomes during the last 5 years. So as incomes have been moving like that, house prices have been moving like that. Vulnerable people need affordable, and so here's the principle that we want to affirm. Vulnerable people need affordable and secure homes. They also need to have tenure options. Now, this is quite important, the issues around home ownership for low-income people, and I want to go into that because we strongly recommend that. It's important to think of inequality as not simply income inequality, but asset inequality or wealth inequality. And some of the only ways in which low-income people in all countries like ours can develop an asset is through housing. And we did that. We did that in the post-war years, the post-war welfare state, right through to the 80s. You had low-interest loans. We were Australia and New Zealand were sort of home-owning democracies where you could have that, and if you didn't have that, you could have a state house for life. We don't have either now. It's very hard to get loans if you're on low income, and state houses, of course, are not for life. More on that a bit later. The accommodation supplement, this may or may not surprise you, is the largest single benefit cost apart from superannuation. If you add up all the benefits together, they come to less than the accommodation supplement. If you add the accommodation supplement, TAS, the temporary assistance support, which is practically always for housing, and the income-related subsidies for housing and state houses and so on, it has a projected cost of 2.7 billion in the 2018-19 year. This is actually 3.1% of total Crown baseline expenditure. That is how stuffed our housing system is. It's an absolute crisis we've got in housing in New Zealand at the moment. And while this government is trying to deal with it, there are ways in which they could deal with it better. And we've suggested some here. So, just bearing that in mind, look at some of these other things. There's an asset stripping going on. It's unintentional, but it's what happened. Home ownership is the lowest it's been in 60 years. Just think of this, of the impact of this on Māori and Pacific people. Between 1986 and 2013, Māori home ownership dropped 20% to 28%. That means 72% of Māori are not living in homes that they own, with a mortgage or whatever. Pacific home ownership dropped 35% in that period to 19%. Meanwhile, Pākehā Europeans maintained a home ownership of 53%. This demonstrates a massive ethnic cultural bias that must be corrected. We need to improve access to affordable, suitable housing for people on low and middle income groups. And we need a range of home ownership products and papakainga housing. And I'll go into those a bit more in a second. The big problem is that the accommodation supplement and the income-related rents subsidies and that are demand-driven. So what happens is landlords put up their prices, accommodation supplement has to chase it, and it just goes on like this. They keep following it, and it's just a waste of taxpayers' money. It's not helping anyone. But you can't take it away because you just throw people into poverty. So there's got to be a systemic way of addressing it. So the problem is, supply. We don't have enough supply of houses. The government understands that, and they're trying to work on that. It's just a shame they chose KiwiBuild to do it. But they're trying to work on that. But affordability, I don't think they're focusing on nearly enough. And they really need to be focusing much more on this. And with the 4 billion, if you take the 2 billion they put into state housing, and the 2 billion into KiwiBuild, they could have used that money three ways. Still had KiwiBuild because that's really a subsidy to developers to get more houses going. They could have been building low-cost homes using particularly community housing providers. We don't have a third sector of housing very much in this country, and we really need to develop it. In the UK, 18% of the housing is actually third sector housing. So this is housing associations, community, not-for-profit groups, local authorities and so on, 18%. We're something like 1 or 2%. And we need to really build that sector. And it's a great shame that opportunity wasn't taken. But it's never too late. So, I've got to stay on the right side. Okay. So, of the current housing stock, too many are unaffordable for low-income families. and what is available to them is often substandard, poorly insulated, damp and unhealthy. This has permanent impacts on children, not to mention older people, and even us ordinary adults. The key part of the solution is for the state to expand and accelerate a public housing building program on an industrial scale. It's massive. It really needs to be a massive program. Now they are trying that. It's just maybe they could use better ways of doing it. The government needs to increase the variety of home ownership options, including equity sharing, rent to buy state houses. Now let me just stop there. You just think of state houses. People go into them today, they might be there for 30 years. They pay the equivalent of what other people pay on a mortgage over that time while they've got kids. Once their kids have gone, they're no longer the most in need. It's some other younger family with children, so they're moved out. You don't have a state house for life any longer, which was what it always was until the 80s. So you moved out, you've got no asset to show it. You've given all that money to the state, and you're then put onto the private market. Now this is asset stripping. It's not intended, no one's sort of thought it out to be nasty, but that's what's happening. And that, in our view, has got to stop. So what we're talking about is rent-to-buy schemes. I mean, a typical example could be, we haven't recommended this particular example, but I'm just doing it to show you. Instead of people paying 25% of household income, perhaps they could pay 30%. 10% of that goes into the equity for the household, 20% goes to Housing New Zealand, and the government could top up the 10% too. And then people, once they've got some equity, they can't be pushed out and moved around. If you've got equity in a house, you've got some substance there, you've got something to borrow off. You can build up a deposit and actually get into the housing market yourself if your circumstances change. You have all sorts of possibilities that you don't have now. And that, of course, requires, as one house is sold and moved off, it's replaced by another state house. You've got to have a building program that continues that sort of process. So we're talking about a whole range of home ownership products, and we could, in actual fact, have some of the ones we used to have in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, like low-interest loans, fixed low-interest loans that got people in. I mean, the government borrows itself for less than 3% at the moment. And even in bad times, they still normally can borrow for 3%. It could help a lot of people get in, and they could get a return on most of that 3% anyway, and still build equity. So these are things that we think really need to be changed. And we want to particularly promote third sector community-based housing. So I want to give you an example of the New Zealand Housing Foundation. If you don't know them, they're worth looking up on a website. This is a not-for-profit developer. Tyndall actually put the money into it originally. There are all sorts of really interesting people. Campbell Roberts has had a lot to do with it. And they build houses in the Waimea Inlet. They built for the government 200 houses. And they're available for shared equity, ownership for low and middle income families, and for renting. They provide support to these people. Now these groups that are currently doing developments of about 200 houses could actually lift their capacity to about 1,000, but they've got to get the contracts from the government, and the government's going directly to developers, private developers, and not feeding these people adequately. And their argument is, well, they don't have the capacity. Well, of course they don't have the capacity to do large-scale 10,000 houses because it's not being built up, but it could be built up. And if we're looking for a long-term systemic solution, that's what we should be looking to. Okay, I'll whip through a few of these other ones now. We need to facilitate innovative thinking and action to increase home ownership through rent-to-buy schemes, shared equity, low-interest loans. I mean, if you just think, if you rent in New Zealand on the private market, a landlord can actually stop you putting up a painting in your house, a bit of art. You can't add additions or anything like you can if you own part of the place. You can't, in some landlords won't let you have pets. Some landlords won't even let you have children. They only need 3 months to move you out. Now that's going to change, but I bet it won't change. It'll only change to 6 months or 9 months or at the most a year. These children go to schools. They're moved out of communities. You know, it's incredibly disruptive, and they're hugely disadvantaged by these things. So I'll move on to employment. So we want to institute a new operating model. So the critical thing here is to start developing active labour market policies and really increase in the investment of this. Because it's not just the people that are currently on benefits. There's so much flexibility in the labour market today. We've got to look at artificial intelligence, all the changes that are occurring, and the precariousness of work for many. So lots of people now don't have jobs that are on an ongoing basis. Many of the lower income jobs, people are contracted for. They're called on when they're needed. They're not called on when they're not. They're running between pumping petrol and cafes and various other jobs, house sitting and so on. And it's a much more fluid labour market than it used to be. So what we need to be able to do is be able to upskill and train people and really have high quality active labour market policies, much like they've developed in Scandinavia. So one of the things we've suggested in the MSD, and that the government said they made a pre-budget announcement, it's one of the few announcements they have made, is that we need to have well-trained, well-resourced regional labour market managers and specialist employment case managers. Many of these got cut back under the last government. We're also suggesting a Deputy Chief Executive for Employment in MSD. There used to be one, but there isn't one at the moment, and to provide really good employment services. So you need two things. You need, for people that are on benefits, you need to be able to help them upskill, provide support for them to go into jobs. We heard absolutely terrible stories where people were just told to go to a job. You know, a case manager's got a pressure on them to get someone into work. So they force someone into a job they're not interested in, they don't have the skills for. They turn it down, or they're not wanted by the employer, because the employers get really irritated with this, by the way, too, this sort of behaviour from government ministries. And then they're told they've refused a job, so they cut their benefit, cut aspects of their benefit. This sort of thing has just got to stop. So it's to try and tailor things around people's skills and lift them up. But the other thing is, the people that are already in the labour market, they're being made redundant, or their workplaces are changing, companies go down, very capable people are redundant. So how do we protect them and save them getting down to the benefit system? And so that's some of what we try to deal with here. So we're talking about reviewing a whole of government approach to labour market training and vocational training, with MB, Te Puni Kokiri, Ministry of Pacific Peoples, Tertiary Education Commission, Careers New Zealand, Polytechnics, industry training organisations, regional and local government. These people really need to get their heads together and do some very smart thinking. They've got all the skills to do it, and then they need to be resourced by the government to establish national and regional advisory boards, get all sorts of social partners, government working with iwi, regional and local government working together, and resource and develop a portfolio of labour market programs that are driven by local labour market conditions. So one of the important things about this is you can't dream up something in Wellington and think it's going to work in Christchurch or somewhere else. There are local labour market conditions, and all of these things need to come into it. So we also think that we should be accessing the best international data and programs so that we're ready for the future labour market directions. There's a lot of really good programs around the world, some very good ones in Europe and some in Australia and so on. So we need to be accessing those and working out how we can reskill, upskill, and use work as much as possible, rather than having people on benefit programs. But doing it in a way that's satisfying for them. So we're talking about good work, not just poking people into jobs that they don't want to do. They need to be much more accessible for disabled people. Now, there's a whole issue around health and disability and work. People that have health problems very often, and not always, but in most cases, reach a point where they can work some of the time. So that can actually help their recovery a lot. And many of these people want to work some of the time. But there needs to be an understanding between employers and government and ways in which jobs can be made much more flexible for people like this. Some of them, and that they can be upskilled, and the whole thing develops sensitivity like that. And if it's sort of threatened that their benefit's going to go, if they go into work and they don't like it, then they lose the benefit, and there's a stand-down period, they're not going to go. We've got to make it seamless so that people are supported still by the benefit when they go into things. As they become more attached to the labour market, you can start withdrawing stuff and just pastoring people into these situations. We're also talking about establishing a short-term benefit for partnered people who lose their job. So you've got a couple that are working, they get a basic, they need the two incomes. One of them loses their job for whatever reason. They need support. And at the moment, they don't get any support because the other person's earning some money. So trying to get them support so they don't sink down into depression, get them in upskill and get them back into the labour market. It's that sort of thing that we're looking at. So we also need to adequately fund redundancy support programs, which is just an extension of what I've been talking. Ensure people can resume benefits readily and quickly. Increase investment in well-coordinated youth development focus. So there are some actually really quite good youth programs and some really good Māori youth programs that the kids find are really cool, and upskill them and build motivation and help introduce them to the labour market. And to also develop a culture whereby if people can't work, or there's not jobs in their particular area at the time, that volunteering is a good option and that they can be well supported through the benefit system while they're volunteering or getting or upskilling and training. Take an evidence-based approach and work from the strengths of the young people. Okay, I'm just going to need to race through this now. Health. One of the things that I'm sure many of you are aware of is that there's a huge discrepancy between a serious disability you might have if it was an accident and you get paid through accident compensation, about 80% of your income, and if you had that disability from birth, where you go on to a benefit. The same condition is treated completely differently. This is really grossly unfair, and there's deep resentment in the disability community about that, and it leads to a lot of problems. So we need to think through. We could only recommend it, and we didn't have time to work it through, but there needs to be a lot of thinking through. Maybe we need a social insurance scheme like ACC for all disability, but we need the people to work that out and whether that's the best way to do it. But clearly the ACC is working a hell of a lot better for people than if you're on a benefit system. And of course there's real pressure in ACC to move some of those people onto the benefit and off ACC entitlements. And we consider this grossly unfair. I've already talked about linking relevant employment support where possible. People having time limit entitlements. So the whole idea, provide security, link people to work. We're not forcing people, we're not going to penalise them if they don't stay in the job. Support them to become attached, just like we would our own children. If it doesn't work, they fall, they come back, they're still secure with income, and then we try it again. Start trusting the people of the country, who are disadvantaged. There's also support for carers, which I think is quite important. So some of these seriously disabled people, Huhana that I showed you there was in the wheelchair. She has a carer with her all the time who's paid to be with her, and there's numbers of people. We have a good friend, an ex-worker at the Family Centre, who has the same thing. Those carers need to be adequately resourced and so on, so we've dealt with that. there. I can't go into the details now. But just to show you the summary of this, in trying to implement within the welfare system a comprehensive approach to support the suitable employment for people with health conditions, these are the sort of principles that we thought were really important. Early intervention with the right level of support, support for part-time work, evidence-based integrated employment and health support services, improved access to health support and services to support return to work with particular support, we do seem to say support a lot, don't we, for people with mental health problems and chronic conditions, easy re-entry to a benefit if employment ends. And there was one other, support for employers in all of this too. So they can help retrain people, and if they're taking on disabled people and there's a bit of a downside for them, that they can be resourced. Now, I won't go to anything else with that sort of depth except to show you one thing here about directing the Ministry of Social Development to develop capacity and capability to engage with, promote and fund community organisations to provide wide-ranging opportunities for volunteers and for people receiving benefits to be meaningfully engaged in their community. So a lot of NGOs, I mean, I know from working one myself, we get asked to help all these people, but we're not resourced at all. And you become limited to what you do, whereas a lot of people could be volunteering and really helping if there was some resource for community organisations. And then there's the whole issue of debt and debt repayment. Many people on benefits are so deeply in debt, so that needs to be addressed. And I don't think we went as far as saying forgiving debt, but I certainly think we should be forgiving a whole lot of debt to help people on. But ensuring that people don't get into more debt is pretty crucial. There's a couple of Māori ones I just think we ought to look at before I stop. So from a perspective of Māori, I've already shown you that really classic example of what happens with housing in terms of asset stripping. But the current system fails Māori. Māori are 36% of all those people on benefits, not including superannuation. So it fails them through, as they see it, through inadequate levels of assistance and the individualised approach to accessing support that is more likely to exclude them. You know, it's not sort of whānau related. It's not managed by their own people, which it could be. In the context of Te Tiriti, it's important that hapu, iwi and Māori as a whole have a significant role in providing governance to and in the monitoring of social security systems. So we support the Ministry of Social Development to continue to shift towards whakamana tangata. They do have some quite good programs that have moved into this, but they need to be much more. And to build the mana of others and uplift them in the way that honours their dignity, and supports the Ministry again to continue to review and evaluate with Māori the services the Ministry delivers to them, and works with them to consider other ways. And a similar sentiment with Pacific people, making the whole system much more responsive to Pacific people and understand, the serious cultural obligations they're under. Now, I'll just finish with the principles. So, finally, we think the Social Security Act should be amended. We haven't obviously drafted the amended Social Security Act, that's beyond our skills. But we need a new Security Act, the Social Security Act, which has this at its heart. The purpose of the welfare system is to whakamana tangata and ensure a dignified life. We need to respect the people that are going through hard times. And we need to do this by providing financial security and social security sufficient for an adequate standard of living. The system fails if we don't do that. And secondly, we need to support people to achieve their potential through learning, caring, volunteering and earning through good and appropriate work. So we need to support people within all of that. So some of the principles in the Kia Piki Aki Te Mana Tangata include these sort of values. Manaakitanga, caring, dignity, respect should reflect it. Ohanga, economics, adequate income. Whanongatanga, treasuring kinship ties, valuing children and whānau. Kotahitanga, unity, being able to participate meaningfully in the community so that they're as open as anyone else to go anywhere in the society. Takututanga prepares people to participate fully now and in a future society, a future economy where there's going to be many changes. And kaitiakitanga, guardianship, a system that is financially and politically sustainable across the medium to long term. And in English, those principles look like that. This is my second to last slide. So I'll just go through them. Be person-centred and well-being focused. This is what we think the Act should gather these principles. Keep children paramount, value whānaus and families, treat people with dignity, respect and compassion, and the people that don't do that should not be in that job. They should be taken off the front desk. If they can't respect and treat people that are vulnerable, then they shouldn't be there. Provide an income sufficient for an adequate standard of living. Provide full and correct entitlements, so they should be required to do that. That's an obligation that on the ministry to do that. Deliver support that is easy to access, timely and appropriate. Provide an employment service that supports people into good and appropriate work. And this last slide. Support the provision of housing that is affordable, secure, of good quality and appropriate for person and their family and whānau. Promote mutual expectations. Aim for equitable outcomes. Build and maintain effective links with other parts of government and to become sustainable. I'm sorry it's taken me quite a lot of time to get through all this. It's a very big report and there's a whole lot of things I haven't said that are also in there. But I'm very open to questions, discussions, comments.